Great. So I can see that a majority of you are connecting, and the rest will connect in due course. So they're all welcome to the US Greentech in Shipping online event. I am Clemences, Head of Strategy at ALJ Group, and I will be your host for this online conference. Our team is happy to be able to organize an online gathering under these very unusual circumstances. And at the same time, we know that soon it will be possible to meet with our speakers, delegates, and sponsors in real life. We were very glad to receive so much interest from speakers all around the globe, just like in our real life events. You will hear a variety of presentations. Some will tackle the pandemic impacts and ways forward. Some will address always significant sustainability issues. And some, of course, will present innovations and green technologies, as this has always been the focus of our Greentech in Shipping series. Before I hand over to our first speaker, a few practical comments about the format and the event and the platform we are using today. I will not provide videos of the speakers, but instead I will ask for them to present their organizations and their activities by themselves. After each speech, I will read the questions, which you can ask on the Q&A section out loud. All viewers will be on mute throughout the entire event. If you take a quick look at the screen on the right side, there are several chat sections and options I would like to draw your attention to. If you click on chat, you will see a button called public. Here you are welcome to post all general comments and questions about the event. The next section besides chat is called Q&A, and I invite you to type your questions for each presentation here. There you will be able to vote for the questions which you like best. I will be monitoring all windows and will try to react in real time. I believe that would be all from my side, and with no further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker of the day, Mr. Bud Dar, Executive Vice President, Maritime Policy and Government Affairs from MSC. He will be speaking on the topic, decarbonization, challenges and opportunities, how a large company approaches the issue. Mr. Badar, would you be able to turn on your video camera and microphone, please?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Great.
Hi, Bud. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. And good morning to those in the U.S. Good afternoon to those in Europe. So
the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We could go ahead and move on to the next slide. That title is kind of a long title. And so that's me. Sorry, there's my contact information. That's what I look like without my beard, which is a Corona beard that managed to stay around after that. Imagine many of you have done the same, but it hasn't changed who I am on the inside. And who I am on the inside is I work for the MSC Group based in Geneva, Switzerland. And we operate a large fleet of both cargo and passenger ships broken into several smaller divisions. So on the cargo side, we have MSC Mediterranean Shipping Company, and then Terminal Investments Limited, which operates terminals that basically facilitate that cargo operation. Medlog, which is our logistics company that operates in support of all that as well. And then on the passenger side, MSC Cruises, Grand Navi Veloci, which is a large ocean-going ferry operator in the Mediterranean, and SNAV, which is operates high-speed ferries in the Mediterranean as well. So what does that mean when you add it all up? On the cargo side of the business, there's about 560 vessels, 200 routes, 500 ports of call, as well as 54 terminals. We carry about 21 million TEUs annually, and we're in 155 countries. And my job to manage government affairs is a big one when you're in 155 countries, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast. On the cruise side, we have 17 modern cruise ships. We're the fourth largest cruise operator in the world. On the cargo side, most of you probably know we're the second largest cargo container carrier in the world. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the regulatory framework and get just right to the heart of it here. Those that say shipping is unregulated, it's the Wild West, are either lying or they just are horribly uninformed. It's actually a heavily regulated enterprise compared to many others around the world. And we're subject to a broad range of environmental requirements, especially that exist at all levels, at the international, the regional, the national, and the subnational level. I mean, if you look at the United States as an example, you have a lot of specific requirements at the California state level, which are differentiated even at the port level. And that's not the only place in the world that it's like that. That's just an example. So it's a very complex web that we have to navigate, even for the most responsible of ship owners who are trying to do the right thing all the time. Anticipating extensions to those particular regimes and the pace that they'll be implemented is a really critical part of what we need to do as ship owners to stay ahead of the regulatory activity and anticipate what's coming, and also make good, sound investments that are somewhat future-proofed as well, because some of these things end up being retroactive. Some of them may not be on their face retroactive, but may end up being really part of your social license to operate as well. So in the future, what's coming? Definitely, there's going to be more and more challenges for ship owners. This is not going to get easier. I'm sorry to say, it's going to get harder. But those of us that are in the business of solving problems, it's the land of opportunity. And if you don't enjoy solving problems, you may be in the wrong line of work at the moment, because it is a challenging framework. Society is demanding more and more from us. And there are some emission and waste streams right now that are not as fully regulated as society would like. Those things are going to happen, and we're going to have to adapt, and we're going to have to be a constructive part of that dialogue going forward, to be taken seriously, to help shape them in a practical way, but also to live up to our own expectations and those that society holds for us. When it comes to emissions, CO2 emissions in particular, we need a step change here. Just a steady progression of energy efficiency isn't going to cut it. Minor modifications aren't going to cut it. We need a major step change in research and development to meet these ambitions. And without that, it's frankly just not going to happen. So one way or another, that has to be catalyzed sooner rather than later. Society's demanding it. We're demanding it of ourselves. Our customers are demanding it of us. And I'm going to speak mostly around our cargo business today. If you have questions about the cruise side of the business, I could talk about that too. But for simplicity, I'll speak mostly about our cargo business. And when it comes to the shippers, I really have to understand these costs are not costs that can be absorbed by the carriers. It's just not going to work that way. The cost of decarbonization, the monetary costs, are going to have to be absorbed up and down the supply chain and the value chain. Going to have to be distributed. It's something that is going to be a demand of society that we're going to have to collectively meet together, or this frankly just won't work in the end. So I want to talk a little bit about how this plays out in the public debate with aspirations versus reality. Container shipping is already the greenest form of cargo mass transport when it comes to carbon. International shipping already has targets in place through the IMO. The levels of ambition for 2030, I think we'll see how we get there. It's easier for some fleets than others, easier for some sectors than others. But I think we'll get there. I think we'll get that 40% intensity reduction by 2030. To get to the 70% intensity reduction, or the 50% greenhouse gas absolute reduction by 2050, we're not getting there without a major change coming. And it's something still over the horizon. It's something starting to peak up. You can see where the opportunities are, but it's not clear at all. And those that would say here's what we're going to have by this date. When you press down a little bit harder and say, well, how exactly are you going to get there? Things get pretty fuzzy fairly quickly, especially when you think of the reality of things like hydrogen or ammonia that have a lot of promise in the longer term if we can work out the challenges that accompany any of these choices. But in the short term, the production methods for those are very CO2 intensive. Doesn't really solve your CO2 problems without either carbon capture technology or a different, better process coming in on scale. So here's a graph that you've probably all seen before. I'm not crazy about comparisons between sectors because it's not exactly like versus like, but it's close enough. It makes such a dramatic qualitative comparison that we can move cargo at 3 grams per kilometer by ship, where air goes at 560. Well, that's a very, very big difference. So let's talk about the public dialogue here. There's increased global attention on the climate crisis and growing public pressure to act now. There was a time when shipping could just live comfortably underneath the radar screen. Nobody paid a lot of attention to it. And we had kind of our own little world to operate in. And, it was left largely in our hands to do the right things beyond what the regulations themselves would require. That's changed. We're just past that. We are now becoming a very visible sector. Those that want to point to shipping as an example of what happens when it's unregulated in with regard to carbon, get away with saying all sorts of things, starting with saying it's unregulated. Who says it's unregulated and knows what they're really talking about? Think about that. The 1997 protocol to MARPOL that established MARPOL Annex 6 back then had a resolution to address greenhouse gas emissions. That was contemporaneous with the original Kyoto Protocol as well in 1997. And over that time, there were various voluntary schemes, data collection schemes, and then mandatory schemes. Shipping had mandatory greenhouse gas reduction measures in place in 2013 as an entire industry. Are they as robust as they could be now? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe they could be toughened up. They were just strengthened a bit over the last year or so. I anticipate probably more of that coming. But hey, we don't get enough credit for that. And the industry didn't oppose being regulated. The industry was trying to be part of the solution there. And that's the reality. So then aligning greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping with the Paris Agreement gets somewhat subjective. And, in part, it kind of hinges on economic projections because shipping is really a conduit for world trade. And as the demand for our services grow, we have to operate more. And a natural part of our operation with the fuels we have is we emit CO2. Well, the claims that shipping could grow to 250% by 250% in their emissions, I think are very unrealistic. I think if you look at OECD predictions from really 18 or 24 months ago, it's pretty obvious those were grossly overstating economic growth. And then if we were to look at it post-COVID, that's nowhere near reality. But today, shipping, depending on which numbers you believe, somewhere between 2.2 and 3% of the overall man-made CO2 emissions are significant. We got to do our part. We have to do our part. We can't ignore it. We have to be part of the solution set here. And I think that's the main thing. What does it take to meet the 2-degree ambition that the parties actually agreed to in Paris, with an ambition looking towards 1.5 degrees? IMO had that in mind. And when they set the levels of ambition, their understanding was that those levels of ambition were consistent with that. So there are some calls to revisit market-based mechanisms. And there's lots of open questions remaining on how you apply that to shipping. There was a recent action by a committee in the European Parliament that, in my opinion, kind of hijacked a project that was supposed to be to align the emissions reporting scheme in Europe and verification scheme with the IMO regulations. They kind of did everything but that. They definitely didn't do that. But then the committee had voted out a solution that includes operational specific targets that have to be met, plus bringing shipping into the European emission trading scheme. Just how that would happen really makes your head hurt when you think about it. I think it's to be generous, it's an ambitious thought, but this isn't the right vehicle to do that one way or the other. And there's pressure to act quickly, but really long-term market-tested solutions here are required, because if you're just going to impose a tax, well, okay, you're going to impose a tax up the entire supply and value chain. Everybody's going to have to pay for this, including ultimately consumers. But what are you trying to get us to do? Because those options have to be there for us to actually decarbonize, for it to get the result it really wants. Otherwise, you're just generating tax revenue off the backs of people that are ultimately using the goods that are being shipped. And the last point there is it really takes a diverse set of solutions. Those are looking for the one single solution to all this. I think it's misguided. And if you look at our fleet, it's kind of a microcosm of it. And I can't imagine one single fuel type or one single propulsion innovation being the answer for our whole fleet. We operate ships of different types in different ways, in different services. They have different lives associated with them in their service life. It's going to take a range of solutions. And I would urge everyone, have an open mind. And maybe it's something we haven't even thought of yet. And as ship owners, I think we have to break free of what our traditional notions are of what things have to be and move beyond that. So I next want to talk briefly about what's going on with technology and innovation. I mentioned more R&D is needed. We've really got to bridge the knowledge and infrastructure gaps there. Shore power charging stations, let's face it, there's very limited availability. It's largely, especially for high power installations, a theoretical conversation, but it can make a difference in port, particularly with local emittance more than CO2. One thing I'll point out is there are some nations that are really ambitious about installing shore power, but the source of the shore power is not a very CO2 friendly source. So what have you really gained? A gram of CO2 that's emitted in Durban might as well have been emitted in Reykjavik. It has the same effect on the atmosphere. So I think we have to keep that in mind and be practical. And then, batteries, hydrogen, renewable energy, that all, plays a potential role. And then I think you also have to look at both retrofitting and design going forward. All the alternatives have limitations. I could do a whole hour if you'd like to give my thoughts for what it's worth on these alternative options. But, you've really got to think about energy density, both with regard to weight and maybe more importantly with volume, because ships stop making sense at some point if too much of the interior volume is taken up for the fuels. And then you've got safety considerations too. So ammonia, for example, may have great promise as a fuel. I think it can be an excellent hydrogen carrier, and it stores up at basically a 40% volume premium over methane LNG, but it's extremely toxic to humans in very low concentration. So you have to address those safety aspects if you're going to actually use that as a marine fuel. And it's not a like-for-like example, but if you think about how many fuel leaks, even of a minor nature, you see in a typical engine room, which with a much thicker molecule, it's a challenge that's a very real challenge that's got to be solved if these fuels maybe do harm the humans that are operating the ships. All these things I think could potentially have solutions. I don't want to rule any of them out, but there's just no magic silver bullet out there. We've got to work really, really hard at this and quickly. Global trade and emissions, as I mentioned before, we're a great leading indicator of what is global trade. And as global trade increases, the need for our services increase. And as we saw, the converse is true when things slow down, as they did on the production end in China, and then in the consumption end in Europe and the United States after that. Then with regard to slow steaming, really, it's a very overly simplistic solution. It works well for some ship types, particularly those that don't have other options. But those that are already operating on a lower point in their power curve never see the kind of dramatic improvement. And also the engines aren't designed to run at those speeds. So there's also other side effects that come from that are pretty negative. But I think forcing slow steaming as what some people will call easy low-hanging fruit, which I strongly disagree with. I think that's an overly simplistic view. If you look at the entire body of ships out there, certainly with container ships, what you would end up doing is disincentivizing innovation and maybe instead locking us into just more and more of business as usual ships, which ultimately is not going to solve the problem. Carbon levy or maritime green funds, such as what the European Union institutions are talking about now, I think would be much better served to, if the solution like that is needed and governments believe that that's necessary, let's do that as a global solution to a global problem, because it is a global problem and one that deserves a serious solution, not one just taken for political reasons and without thinking through all the implications carefully. And then we're seeing increasing pressure from investors and banks as well, and they're demanding this from us. We have to deliver. We have to deliver improvements and also quantify what we're doing. So what can you do with the fleet? I'll give you a couple of examples. For us, we have really improved the energy efficiency tremendously with each new generation of ship. We're down to, on our MSC Golson class, to 7.49 grams per ton mile, which is really a dramatically low number if you think about that. And the service speed of a container ship, because the supply chain demands a certain service speed, is not slow as ships out there either. So it really does make a big difference if you'll invest in fleet renewal and the technology and you do it in the right way. And on the retrofitting side, we retrofitted 250 ships with engineering improvements, including bulbous bows and modified propellers and boss caps that go with that. And then between 2015 and 2019, we used the EEOI as our own internal metric, and we got a 12% improvement over that relatively short period of time. So we feel like we're making good progress, and when the Golson class gets factored into the fleet, I think we'll see more improvements there as well. Sorry, I think I skipped over one slide here. So the next one, I want to talk about experimenting with new solutions and pushing the envelope. You got to keep an open mind. You got to keep trying new things. What have we done on the engineering side? Air bubble blankets, we're working on. That's not brand new technology, but it's new in our fleet. We're seeing some success there, as others have as well, but it's highly dependent on ship size, shape, and service speed. It's not right for all ships. Better performing engines. The vendors are working with us very closely on that over time. I mentioned more efficient propellers already. Alternative fuel sources that are currently available. LNG is going into at least a series of our cruise ships. We haven't quite found the solution that suits us in our cargo fleet yet, although we haven't ruled it out and we're still looking for it. Shore power, we've got an enormous number of shore power installations in our cargo fleet. And biofuel, we're using quite extensively. In Rotterdam, which is a major hub for us, we have replaced all of our 0.5% sulfur and 0.1% sulfur fuels with up to a 30% biofuel blend, and we're using it on a routine basis. I mean, we moved past these trials and these 10% numbers actually quite some time ago. We haven't talked about it all that openly in public, but it's working pretty well for us, and we're very proud of that. And it's made a substantial difference in the carbon profile. And then other things to look at: battery power on large ships. Anytime in the near future, I just see that as being a complementary augmentation type of source, but it still has definitely a role to play, particularly if you've got diesel electric drive, and maybe you can keep that other engine, whether it's a generator or whether it's a main, from starting. You just don't ever have to start it, because you can control the surge with batteries. Has a lot of potential. Fuel cells have potential. I mentioned ammonia, wind, and solar as well in certain applications. So then the last point that I'll make is just about the container sector. I mean, we are an absolutely essential part of trade, but investment in innovation is absolutely needed to bridge the technology gap. And I think both tracks, in regard to fuel and then the primary converters, the engines, if you will, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an engine. We should all be thinking out of the box and really do what's needed to live into the ambition that both we have and also society has for us. Again, I'll reemphasize, there is no one-size-fits-all solution here that I can see, and frankly, I think it is just a mistake to look for one or advocate for just one. For example, a lot of people tend to criticize LNG. We don't. We see it not only valuable today to take the emission gains that are available today, and they are net gains according to the research that I have confidence in, but it doesn't get us to the 2050 needs. But why not take those gains now and then develop biomethane or synthetic LNGs to make that a long-term, broader solution that really works in the end and gets us to the end state. And right now, we all really need to do a better job as ship owners and our entire community explaining what we're doing. We're doing very good work, and we're actually pushing for regulations. We have repeatedly to try and enhance how we operate and how we're regulated in our space and to do our part. And I think the shipping community has historically just not done a very good job of that, unfortunately. I think we can all do better, and I would urge you all to be part of that. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions if that's appropriate at this time, but it's been my pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you very much, Bud, for your presentation. Interesting as always. At this point, I don't see any questions from our viewers to you, but I encourage the viewers to ask questions in private to you. You can always do that. I think we got one question while I was speaking. It's from Andy Statham. MSC Ship Management and Cyprus are using our remanufacturing processes in respect of engine cylinder heads and thus reducing the indirect emissions associated with that component compared to new. My gut feeling is that they do so primarily for economic reasons though. Do you see the possibility that operators will be encouraged to consider indirect emissions in the future?
So I think when you talk about indirect emissions, yeah, eventually you get there with scope 2 emissions, but you have to start with scope 1. And the overwhelming majority of our emissions are directly from shipping operations. I mean, the math is really high. It's well above 90% in the case of most large operators. And I think that's where you get the biggest gains the quickest. But one other thing I want to mention, because kind of inherent in that is that in the statement that mostly for economic reasons, honestly, I think when you find synergy between something that makes economic sense and something that makes environmental sense, nobody needs to hide from that. I run towards it. I embrace it because you're really onto something. And when it comes to air emissions, and particularly CO2 emissions, at least when it comes to energy efficiency around the initial fuels, I think the alternatives may take some additional capital investment. This can be cost positive and environmental positive at the same time. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. I never shy away from that. To me, that's just a beautiful synergy of good business practices being a good business practice for more than one reason.
Okay, thank you very much, Bud, for that. And of course, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. No more questions from our audience, but they may will, or may not will, contact you directly in private section. So thank you very much once again.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, I would like to welcome on stage our next presenter, Mr. Juha-Pekka Jalkanen. He's Director, Energy and Process System, North America at Walmart. He will be speaking on the topic, Walmart's learnings, how shore team can remotely support crew on problem solving. Mr. Juha, I invite you to activate your camera and your microphone, please.
Okay. Voice is there, but I don't see any.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So I assume it's gonna be black screen this time. I don't know how to switch the camera on. I'm sorry.
It should be on top. There's the icon, camera icon, and you click on it, and you should activate your camera.
corona months at home may be just a positive thing, but
It's okay, Juha. So we can show only the slides if you prefer, so everybody will hear you and they will see your slides.
yeah, please.
Okay.
All right. So welcome from my side. I'm Juha Jalkanen, as presented. I'm the director of Valmet in North America, responsible for our marine automation as well as power and process. And I'll share a few experiences of ours, how we have been able to support our customers during these demanding times when we can't send our team on board. And let's see, I'm still trying to learn this new webinar system as well. The main reason why we are kind of in a key of helping the ships is obviously the ECR, the ship automation is the main interface for the ship crew, for everything that happens on board the ship, and it all comes together in the ECR. All the alarms from various subsystems, all the operations are done from there, and all the historical data is stored in the ECR, and that's kind of where when the ship has a problem, that's where the problems are typically solved, and that's kind of our main center of information. Large cruise ships have lot of displays, lot of information, of course, in the ECR. But this is kind of a typical setup in a modern cruise ship. Why Valmet is talking about this issue? We've been providing these ship automation systems since early 80s, 79, 82, and most of the systems on board, the bit older systems, they are all ours. There was a time period when the systems were delivered by our partner at that time, Valmarine. Mostly the cruise customers will know that name. Nowadays, since 2010, we've been operating directly to our customers with Metso or Valmet names. And nowadays, we directly operate with Valmet. We have opened our office in Miami just before the coronavirus things, and our service center is here in Fort Lauderdale. About the remote operations and capabilities, we have 8 global service centers that are working completely remotely together with our customers in 4 continents. So basically meaning we have a manned service center in all time regions, and hundreds of connections to our customers' systems and hundreds of service cases throughout those remote connections. That's kind of the background why we are talking about remote connection. Especially it's been uttermost useful during these corona times. In North America, where I am, we've been able to support not only our cruise fleet, but also so important tissue machine industry with making toilet paper throughout our remote connections, while basically all the customers have banned entry of service personnel into the sites. Also, we've been able now to do fully system startups so that there is a minimized team on the site, and expertise support is done by remote connections. These all to limit the traveling needs to the sites and amount of people possibly having connection with any other people. Key to efficient remote connection and working is a safe remote connection. So when we have our ship system that is locally on board and which is locally controlling the ship and the ECR displays where the operators are working, there is a firewall between the control room and the ship other systems that are kind of on a DMZ, the militarized sized zone systems, where the ship officers can connect to the system. They can see what is going on in the system on their cabins, and they can provide support. And then using the cruise line internet connections, we can extend the system to their shoreside offices. The idea here is that the shoreside superintendents can also support the ship over their safe connection, and this also gives us possibility to use the same connection to provide support to the ship if it's necessary. Then these connections are fully managed by the ship owners. Satellite connections, of course. One specific tool that we found very, very important during this spring is our time machine mode tool that is collecting all the events of the system, the historical binary signals like alarms or pump starts or stops, with the historical trends of pressures, for example, with operation actions to the display. So what we can do is go back on time and replay the events during the problem situation. And this helps superintendent or our specialist to understand what was actually going on that special event and what actions were taking that might have caused the problem situation, so that we can also give advice to the ship personnel. Well, it's all great when internet connection is in place and we can get the remote connection, but unfortunately that's not always the case. Often in cruise industry, connections are poor and non-functional. So we need to have alternative plans and plan Bs in place. So this replay function that I showed previously becomes extremely valuable when you need to go to the plan B. So what the team can do is they can actually pick up their phone, do the replay function on the screen, video it, and then send it by phone connection. This is something that we have been using in several cases where the actual remote connection to the ship has not been working for a reason or another. And that allows the ship personnel to deliver the vital information to their superintendents and to us. It's also at these times very difficult for superintendents to go on board the ship as well. So it's vital that the ship can somehow deliver the information to the shore, as the ships keep on having problems even if they are not sailing. We have also alternative means to work when the bandwidth is really low. We are using pointer tool that is run in our phones, which helps us to deliver information from ship to our shoreside people with lower bandwidth. We've been using those a lot in dry docks and tested in dry docks where conditions are typically very bad. So what you see is this is kind of really low bandwidth requirement for bad connections, and there is a difference of picture delivered by Pointer and Skype, and there is a huge difference on how much bandwidth our tools are requiring. When we are talking about remote access and remote support, we also, of course, need to think about the security, and this is something we can't avoid. A few tips there. Of course, nowadays all the companies are well educated on the cybersecurity items, but I kind of want to pinpoint things that, first of all, there are very good guidelines from in US NERC SIP guideline for power plants, public utilities, DNVGL and Lloyd's, they have their guidelines. We've been following all of those for years. Also, when DNV started testing of the ships, we were first ones on board doing the testing. So testing our systems against their guidelines and making it stronger in case we needed to do adjustments. And then kind of painful and difficult thing at the current economical conditions for cruise companies is that the systems Windows system should be really updated. The Windows 10 is recommended system as well. The patching should keep on being doing. A lot of the systems, there is easily a temptation to kind of hold on with the patching as in the current conditions. And then, of course, the system itself needs to be well designed. The firewalls needs to be in place. Design needs to be correct, and especially there needs to be some kind of a plan for the bad day, how the system will recover and what kind of damage will be happening if there is a cyber attack. Like, for example, in our system, we have a lot of Linux-based nodes in our system. So if there would be a Windows-based attack, we can still survive the bad day. All right, thank you. That was my presentation about the remote connections and remote support.
Questions for you. As of this point, we don't have any questions from the audience, but I encourage, if you have some questions for Juha or for Walmet, you can please contact them directly via private section, or you can post a public question as well. So thank you very much, Juha, for amazing presentation.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you. And right now I would like to invite on stage our next presenter. This will be presenter Ms. Ginger Garte. She is Environmental and Sustainability Director, Americas Marine and Offshore at Lloyd's Register. She will be speaking about the topic called climate alignment. Hello, Ginger. I invite you to turn on your camera and your microphone.
South Florida, as you can imagine, as we all are, many of us are working remotely. I sit within the Marine and Offshore team at Lloyd's Register and lead the Americas Regional Consultancy Group for Environmental and Sustainability Services, responsible for implementing executive strategy to achieve our team goals and initiatives. And part of today's discussion on climate alignment will review many of the items that Bud spoke of, and about how we can begin to progress our decarbonization pathways and how there are some benefits to doing that early. So Lloyd's Register is the leader in understanding emissions to air from marine engines, and our marine exhaust emissions research program almost 3 decades ago assessed the nature and magnitude of shipping's contribution to atmospheric pollution. This allowed us to note that between 2.3% and 3% of the global responsibility for CO2 emissions. And since then, we've been investing in research and development on zero emission vessels, future fuels, transition pathways, and how to safely use zero carbon fuels research. So much as we would like to say that we have progressed along this pathway in a positive way, we have not. We have a lot of work to do. And this is one of the biggest milestones along this kind of timeline, telling us to get started, is the IMO's 2050 greenhouse gas ambitions to reduce the absolute carbon dioxide emission by 50% by 2050 when compared to 2008 baseline. So the trajectory, we have seen what the possible scenarios look like and what those stories are telling us. So far, the marine industry has invested in a low carbon model, including mostly clean hydrocarbons, for example, liquefied natural gas and methanol produced from fossil fuels. These fuels improve air quality, but they do not meet the IMO's 2050 ambitions. So for now, we can view LNG and methanol fuels as a bridge to decarbonization. So on our timeline, that represents the 2020 to 2025 horizon. And 2025 to 2030 horizon, we need to have proven low carbon technologies being replaced by zero emission fuels. A difficult thing concept to grasp in a very short horizon of 10 years. But by 2030, we need to have zero emission vessels joining the fleet as a majority of the global fleet as well. And that, if we don't see that, then the reductions may not be enough to keep the temperature rise of 2 degrees C in check. So this image shows us what doing nothing would do in the dashed blue lines. So that's one scenario, is to do nothing. And the total annual greenhouse gas emission reduction of 50% by 2050 is shown in purple, the goal or absolute target that IMO has set, and then 100% reduction in gold if shown to be possible. As Bud mentioned, decarbonization is the most complex challenge of the shipping industry. And it's not a solution that, again, one size fits all. And the IMO, the pressure is requiring IMO to start developing legally binding measures, which could include increases in ships' technical and operational efficiency, a low and zero carbon fuels implementation program, national action plans, and market-based measures. These would be in addition to the energy efficiency programs such as Energy Efficiency Design Index and SHIP Energy Efficiency Management Plan, which we're already familiar with, as well as the IMO's Fuel Consumption Data Collection Scheme that entered force on the 1st of March 2018 and requires more transparent collection of data and information for the global fleet so that we understand what the impact is and we get better data collection. Voluntary action by industry and governments will help deliver technology and infrastructure to achieve the IMO strategy. So it's not expected that the shipping industry will face this challenge alone. The good news is that there's Poseidon Principles and climate alignment services, which allow early energy efficiency movement changes and part of the pathways, testing pathways to decarbonization for early adopters. How does that work and why? Because shipping is forecast to grow, and as a minimum, we see it growing 50%. So because of that, to keep pace with a expanding fleet, given the additional data information that we have that the shipping is responsible for 3% of our CO2 or slightly less, this is not just a shipping industry challenge. It is a human challenge. And Sustainable Development Goal 13 tells us take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. So how does that fit in with shipping? In 2015, 193 countries adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As you see on the screen, there are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. As part of the United Nations family, the IMO is actively working towards these 2030 Agenda Sustainable Development Goals. And most of the elements in this 2030 Agenda will only be realized with a sustainable transport sector supporting world trade and facilitating a global economy. IMO's Technical Cooperation Committee has formally approved the linkages between the organization's technical assistance work and the Sustainable Development Goals. So where do these align? The one that you can see at the top of our agenda is Sustainable Development Goal 13. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. That's the focus of our discussion today. And decarbonization, of course, is the most complex challenge our industry faces. Voluntary action by the industry and by government to advance infrastructure will also help deliver technology and progress the strategy aims for the IMO. It is not, again, the shipping industry acting alone, but there's a significant change in the energy supply market, full-scale prototypes and pilots, not just small-scale ones, easy to store zero-carbon fuel work, batteries, and development of policy standards, rules, and safe use of these new fuels. Poseidon Principles and climate alignment calculations help us understand and progress and do the work that's necessary to achieve and accomplish these goals collectively. So this is the good news in that it has benefit for society as a whole. So what is Poseidon Principles? They're a major boost to the IMO's ambitions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the global shipping industry. And working alongside Cargill, Euronav, JP Morgan, Maersk, Watson, Farley, and Williams, to name a few, LR is proud to support Poseidon Principles and has been instrumental in drafting the framework designed to integrate climate considerations into future lending decisions to assess the climate alignment of existing loan portfolios. And that is, it sets up the option of green banks aligning and partnering with companies such as Cargill, the Euronav, JP Morgan, Maersk, Watson, Farley, and Williams. And Lloyd's Register has been involved in the drafting of the framework to integrate climate considerations into the future lending decisions to assess climate alignment of existing loan portfolios. So fleets are able to be reviewed and weighted based on the remaining loans that they have. And currently, it includes a group of 18 banks leading this green transition in the maritime industry. And I mentioned that these financial institutions represent a bank loan portfolio of approximately 150 billion and more than a third of the global ship finance portfolio. And banks continue to join, partners continue to join, and follow the tenets of the principles, which I will review with you as well. And so we see this as a very a good advance and advantage for early adopters. And they're also aligning with, of course, the United Nations to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Recognizing that the success of the marine industry is linked to the environment and well-being of society. And it's this unified global ambition driving us to innovate and together achieve these aims. So yes, it's daunting, but it's been this structure and framework helps, as well as having an understanding of your vessel and then your portfolio's climate alignment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The first part of the framework is to support low to no emission vessels and its regulatory, following in the footsteps of the IMO's target to reduce shipping's greenhouse gases. The technical guidance for the accountability and enforcement principles lay out 4 steps and the information flow process at each step of the assessment and enforcement requirements, and they have all been clearly identified. So for Principle 1, assessment of climate alignment, it requires you to assess your portfolio and defines the methodology for calculation. Accountability, Principle number 2, establishes the reliance on IMO standards and recognized organizations for the provision of identical, unbiased information and consistency across the signatories. Enforcement is Principle 3 and requires the inclusion of covenant clause in new business activities to ensure access to high quality data being produced under the IMO data collection scheme. And Principle 4, transparency, stipulates how the results of the portfolio's climate alignment are disclosed publicly. So how is this done, and what is that performance measure? So signatories will measure their carbon intensity of their shipping portfolios annually and assess their climate alignment to the IMO's goals. We'll take a look at how that looks graphically a little bit later. The IMO data collection scheme enables the calculation of a carbon intensity metric known as the annual efficiency ratio, or AER, using parameters of fuel consumption, distance traveled, and design deadweight tonnage. The AER is reported in unit grams of CO2 per ton mile. So here's the graphic representation of what those trajectories look like. For the Poseidon principles, climate alignment is defined as the degree to which the vessel or portfolio's carbon intensity is in line with the decarbonization trajectory and meets the IMO's ambition for reducing total annual greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2050. So a decarbonization trajectory that is in line would be below the line and in green, and show that it's aligned and checked. And graphically, when it's calculated, it's reviewed and shows up in green. If it's not aligned and the calculation is above that trajectory, in red, for ease of recognizing what ships in your portfolio are not aligned. this makes things relatively simple. The vessel carbon intensity can be calculated using data provided by the ship owner as collected by the IMO DCS. This data has been independently checked to ensure a compliance in accordance with these regulations, but requires the ship owner to provide consent for the data to be submitted to relevant flag state and be shared with the signatory. The Poseidon Principles require that all signatories use this method for calculating carbon intensity so that it is, again, consistent. To assess climate alignment for a single vessel, the vessel's annual carbon intensity is compared with the decarbonization trajectory for its respective ship type and ship class. And early on, you can see that it is much easier to use efficiencies, energy efficiencies, as a method to drop your trajectory. And this is how the ships are represented. Or the company sees the overall climate alignment of its shipping portfolio. To assess the climate alignment at the product and portfolio level, the vessel's carbon intensities in each product and portfolio are aggregated. The green dots are aligned, as I mentioned, and the red dots are misaligned. In this example, the weighting is applied according to the debt outstanding designated to each vessel. The portfolio is not climate aligned because, on average, it is 14% above the carbon intensity required for decarbonization for that vessel, class, and size. So how do we meet the transparency requirements? On an annual basis, each signatory reports the overall climate alignment of its shipping portfolio, provides supporting information as per the accountability requirements to the Secretariat. And this requirement takes effect for each signatory in the calendar year after the calendar year which that member became signatory, no later than November 30th. This is done on an annual basis, and it is published for the overall climate alignment of its shipping portfolio. And also in any relevant institutional reports on the timeline that is appropriate for that signatory. The accountability and enforcement principles are intended to ensure that the assessment and disclosure of portfolio climate alignment under Poseidon Principles is practical, fair, and accurate. The intent of this approach is to ensure the development and trust in the Poseidon Principles amongst the signatory. Each step of the assessment of climate alignment, signatories rely on the exclusivity on the data types, data sources, and service providers identified in the technical guidance. All these details are outlined in the guidance documents that can be found online. So, Poseidon Principles allow you to balance and manage risk in your portfolio. It's a potential instrument in carbon trading and offers significant benefits to signatories, to the global maritime industry, and to society as a whole. What kind of climate alignment services are available? Using AIS, IHS Fleet Database, and LR ship performance models, we can determine the climate alignment, and this method has been proven to be plus or minus 5% accurate. By comparing more data, you actually, of course, increase accuracy, and the starting point is IMO DCS data that can be provided via the transparently to vessels that are classed with your RO, or that can be provided directly in the form of regulatory documents and certificates on board. This is an example of climate alignment estimation and analysis, and reports the annual efficiency ratio. And it shows what would happen if no further action was taken in the future. And using the Poseidon principles, all 4 principles. So what kind of things need to be considered before becoming a member of the Poseidon principles? Careful feasibility studies, risk reviews, and modeling is recommended to analyze voyage routes, operating ranges, missions, and ensuring that there's a consistent, reliable supply chain, that the infrastructure has been developed so that there are varying levels of confidence in some of the low to no carbon technologies. And collectively, collaborations are of benefit because the infrastructure can be partnered with government agencies and also with ports that are interested in being part of this transition. There are many that are already investing in renewable energies. And so it's really important to understand where those actions are happening and taking place, and what portion of your fleet might benefit from that.
So we have to move on with our event, and I would like to present the new speaker. The next speaker, it will be Mr. Amit Basu. He is Vice President, CIO and CISO at International Seaways. And he will be speaking on the topic business continuity in a pandemic and cybersecurity. Mr. Amit, would you please turn on your camera and your microphone, please? Hello, Amit.
Hello, how are you?
Doing good. And you, how's everything?
I'm good.
Everything is good. So we had some minor difficulties. My apologies for that. So the floor is yours, and thank you once more.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Amit Basu. I am the head of IT and IT security at International COS in New York City. As many of you know, International COS is one of the largest tanker companies in the world, providing energy transportation services worldwide. I am now working over 25 years in maritime IT, and all these years, I have pioneered several technology implementations and digitalization efforts in maritime domain. For the last few years, I am busy designing a cybersecurity risk management framework at International COS. Today, I'm going to share with you my experiences on a very current and a relevant topic, business continuity practices during this global pandemic and managing the emerging cyber risk. This unprecedented COVID-19 outbreak in 2020 has fundamentally changed the way all of us used to work. Working from home became the work mode of choice for the entire world. But at the beginning, it was definitely not easy for every company. Some were already familiar with working from home, but a lot of companies were not. There are some very real-life deterrents in working from home. Most companies still require their employees to use company-issued computer for work. And in a lot of companies like ours, most of the employees go to work using the mass transit, and they prefer to leave their computer at work rather than carrying it back and forth daily. A lot of business processes still require printing reports or scanning documents, and most of the employees generally don't have those printing or scanning devices at their home. So it was almost a shock for a lot of companies when they have to almost overnight decide to close the offices and instruct their entire workforce to work from home. Here, I will talk from our own experience. A few elements of prior planning have definitely helped the companies to quickly achieve the full capability while working from home. The first element that definitely contributed was a well-defined business continuity plan, a plan that had a scenario of loss of the office premises, exact what steps to follow when employees cannot access the primary office building, and then regular review and testing of that plan so that the plan is current. Secondly, some proactive preparation for the pandemic response, as we all were watching COVID situation coming close to our home in the beginning of second quarter or late first quarter. What I mean by proactive preparation, have a communication plan so that the employees are continuously aware of what's going on inside the company and around them outside. Making sure employees have their computers ready and updated for working remotely on a short notice. And then thirdly, the companies who have actively using cloud computing benefited greatly in this sudden migration to working from home. The cloud service providers helped in two ways. One, they provide a disaster recovery solution by allowing to build a copy of office systems and computers in the cloud that can host the copies of key systems and replicate the data. And there are also the software as a service solutions for key business applications like email, finance, HR, CRM. Not only these cloud-provided solutions provide cost savings, flexibility, and scalability, they also guarantee availability from anywhere over the internet, ensuring business continuity. We at International COAs leveraged all of the above, and that helped us to make the best of this bad situation. We achieved close to 100% operational efficiency very quickly, even though our CEO had to take the tough decision to move entire staff to work from home suddenly on a Sunday afternoon in mid-March. And now we are in the 19th week. We all are still working from home. In between, we have announced our 2019 results right on time. We closed the quarter one on schedule, almost ready to close the quarter two in a couple of more weeks. Our entire staff became Microsoft Teams Pro. We are having daily team meetings, weekly all staff meetings on video. We even had an entire board of directors meeting on Microsoft Teams, where our management team made live video presentations. And all these are little silver linings in the midst of this grim world situation, and a small testament of our cloud-first IT strategy that we adopted more than 5 years ago. So once everybody settled down working from home, and we achieved a near 100% operational capability. That could have been maybe the happy ending of this story. But unfortunately, that was not the case. With this mass remote working culture also came a set of new cyber threats. As I mentioned already, most of the organizations across the world were forced to send their entire workforce to work from home almost suddenly, without any prior planning. So that also means without adequate security preparations. A survey carried out some time back revealed more than 50% people were using their own personal devices for work from home. More than 90%, I would say maybe almost everybody, are conducting business over their home internet connections. And also the reverse is true. Those of us who are using our office computers at home to do office work, during this long work from home, we are also using the same device for personal purposes at home. The use of personal assets for professional purposes and professional assets for personal use. This overlapping, this disappearing boundary between what's personal and what's professional, that is causing a significant cybersecurity challenge. Once the entire world went to a lockdown, when every country were busy trying to deal with the COVID-19 situation, every company was scrambling to settle down with their entire staff suddenly working from home. Unfortunately, the cyber criminals were not on lockdown. Remember, today, the cyber crime is an organized sector with a lot of sophistication, and this was an ideal opportunity for them to increase their activities. The professional cyber criminals, they saw the security meltdown due to this global pandemic as a great opportunity to further their agendas. On top of that, the recreational hackers, they all now have more time at their hands as they are working from home. And this mass remote working has also opened up new insider threats, whether it's negligence or malicious employees. So cyber attackers started leveraging a few common security risks that became evident as more and more people started working from home and accessing their enterprise information assets in the middle of a lot less security and controls. What are those risks if we talk about? Say our homes have no physical security like we have in the office premises. There are no cameras, there are no access cards. So a person with a bad intention can get access to my computer screen a lot more easily if I'm not being careful. At home, we mostly don't have sophisticated network securities like we have in the office, the firewalls, the intrusion prevention, intrusion detection tools. So as if there is no doorman there to stop the bad people to come in. Most of us at home are using shared and unsecured internet connection to connect to the office systems and data. Maybe we have never changed the internet provider's default settings, the default SSID, the default password, and that really allows anybody to hack into my computer fairly easily. Maybe somebody else in my home is accessing some not so safe websites, using the same internet link that I'm using for my office work. If my company has never practiced remote working before, maybe I am now connecting to my office system using just a password, not a VPN or a multi-factor authentication. So all a bad guy needs to crack is my password, and using that, he can hack into my office systems and data. When we are in the office using the computer, they restrict us to go to several websites. But maybe when I'm at home, even on a company-given computer, I can go to any website I want to. And that can really be dangerous, as I can get viruses, malwares, ransomwares from those bad websites quite easily. Even if my computer is given by the company, a lot of the security features that are available on those computers, those security features were designed assuming the computer will be used inside the office. Things like the regular updates to my antivirus software, backups of my local hard disk, the scans that's run on my computer to find out any vulnerabilities, regular patching of the updates to my computer. So with these computers not being in the office, some of these mechanisms may have started failing, and that makes my computer a lot more vulnerable to the cyber attackers. The IT folks now supporting the user computers at home using various remote support or remote access tools. But as these IT folks are installing more and more remote access tools on these computers, these tools can also open a door for the cyber attackers who, using a phishing or a social engineering technique, can get access to these tools and can hack into these computers. And lastly, but not the least, we are using a plethora of internet-based collaboration tools nowadays. Microsoft Teams, Zoom, WebEx, and several others. They are being used by every company of their employees all the time to do video calls, to share screens. And these have definitely increased the attack surface tremendously. And these are a leading cause of a lot of computer compromises that has happened over the last few years. So if we take a minute and think what all I just now discussed, that what all risk that currently exists in our computers at home, I think we will all realize that we really have created a very scary work environment at home. And it's truly an heaven for the cyber criminals. As a proof of that, these are some of the early numbers that were published between beginning of the year or January, February until May. I don't want to read through the numbers. You can see in front of you, and they are really scary numbers. And top of that, I just add, I think we all have read, just last week, Twitter reported a very high-profile breach. They admitted that their staff with internal system access were subject to successful social engineering attack, and that caused Twitter accounts of a very high-profile people to have phony posts on their handles. This was a really scary situation, and more importantly, it also shows that even in highly technology company like Twitter, their internal people are also not immune to social engineering attacks. So, talking about how can we then secure our remote work environment? And here I would like to share some of our own experience. These are some of the key areas that we have focused in the last few months to keep our user computers safe at their home. First, I think absolutely very basic is enforcing a very strong security policy. Strong passwords, locking the screens when not in use, allowing users not to install any softwares of their own. These are basic practices which you follow in the office, and we need to follow even more stringently when we are working at home. Keep organizing awareness trainings for the users. Users need to keep hearing about best practices as well as the horror stories that's happening around the world and how they can safeguard the company information and their own personal information at their home. This needs to happen frequently and repeatedly. Two-factor authentication for any enterprise system or data access, be it the email, data collaboration on SharePoint, OneDrive, multi-factor is absolutely a must. Only password is never enough. Users who are accessing critical business systems like the financial systems, ERP, HR systems, should consider implementing a VPN. VPNs ensure that all the communication between the user computer and the server are encrypted over the internet. Backing up the user computers. While working at home, we all are accumulating a lot of business critical data on our local computer hard disks. So backing them up is a very important practice. It also protects us against ransomware attacks. As I said a couple of slides back, there may be some issues with the regular antivirus updates, vulnerability scans, regular patchings, because the computers are not in the office. So we need to implement some extra monitoring to make sure these checks are still being performed regularly. Consider a strong anti-malware, anti-spam protection for our email systems. In the last slide, I mentioned that one of the key security mechanisms in our office is the firewalls that protects any bad people from coming in or internal people to go out to bad sites. Since we don't have that protection at our home, we should consider installing an web content filtering on our user computers that can at least protect the users from, by mistake, going into any malicious websites, which can bring in malware or ransomware on those computers. We have researched, tested, and implemented most of these tools or practices that I just mentioned. And we have definitely seen the benefits using these tools and practices. It definitely allows me to sleep better at night. However, every company obviously needs to analyze their own risks, their threats, compare the various tools, the benefits they bring in, and then decides which ones are priority for them. But each one definitely has their benefits and they should be considered. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. Before finishing, I would like to make two final comments. We are fighting the cyber criminals for quite a few years now. It's nothing new. It's just getting they're getting more sophisticated. The situation is worsening almost every year. But in all these years, the focus of the security people was always strengthening the network perimeter security. We always trying to make the wall around our office network higher and stronger. But this year, when the world suddenly started working from home, the network perimeter became so wide, the borders almost vanished. So with this vanishing network perimeter, we should really need to shift our focus from securing the network perimeter to securing the endpoints or the user computers. They should really be our focus area. How can we best protect our user computers at their homes? And lastly, and maybe most importantly, today, cyber defense is no longer about staying a step ahead of the bad people. It's about trying to remain no further than a step behind the adversaries. Nobody is immune from a cyber attack. Nobody. It's just a matter of time. So cyber resiliency should be every company's cybersecurity goal. It's all about how quickly can we recover from a cyber attack and put back the business operation in a normal behavior. Every company needs to have a well-rehearsed incident response plan ready. And that's all was from me today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Amit, for your presentation. We have one question from you, from Kit Robertson. You mentioned that employees from home should revise their internet provider settings, use strong passwords, and take other actions. How do you evaluate general employee knowledge of cybersecurity, especially those who don't work in IT departments?
Okay, so I would repeat one point I made in one of the slides. Awareness training for the employees in cybersecurity is a must. It has to be done frequently and repeatedly for every employee. Employees are the first line of defense in the cybersecurity. Whatever tools, whatever mechanisms we put in place technologically, an employee has to notice an unusual behavior, suspect that can be a cyber attack, and bring that to the notice of the IT security people to do the further analysis and any examination. So to educate the employees to reach to that level is an absolute necessity for every company of a shape or size.
Okay. Thank you very much for your answer, Amit, and of course for the amazing presentation. As of this point, we don't have any questions, but they may ask you privately or in our public sections later on. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Well, welcome on stage our next presenter, Mr. Mike Guggenheimer. He is the president and CEO of RSC Biosolutions. He will be speaking on the topic, Solve Smarter, Advanced Technical Solutions for New and Continuing Operational Challenges. Hello, Mike.
Hello. Everything working, I take it?
Yes, everything is fine, so the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. My name is Mike Guggenheimer. I am the president and CEO of RSC Biosolutions. I'm really happy to be here, grateful for these formats to engage with the industry in a time where we can't be together in person. RSC Biosolutions is a global industrial biotechnology company. We typically work with large fleets and equipment owners and operators to help them deal with either environmental risk or risk to human health and safety using technology that allows them to address these risks without trading off performance or other kind of economic factors. Bud talked earlier about the ability to have these things coexist, and we feel very strongly about kind of making the business case for safer technology throughout our portfolio. We're really best known in the marine space. We have, for our lubricant technology, we've been working in the marine industry for many decades, almost 30 years at this point. And we're best known in this industry for lubricant technology that's biodegradable and in many cases renewable, using a technology that is a bit unique in the industry in that it is in a category called PAO and hydrocarbon related, meaning it has the tendency to be very compatible and very stable, which is extremely unusual when you're moving into alternative technologies, to have something that drops into your existing systems. Today, I'm excited to talk about something that is new and different and addresses the trends that we're facing right now. Obviously, there's a lot of trends and issues and risks that the industry is facing. We've heard about several of them today. We are heavily involved in the decarbonization work that a number of these presentations have addressed. But today, there is a new challenge. We are, in an industry and in a time where we haven't seen the kinds of challenges we're facing right now before. And I think it's important to recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenge that we're dealing with related to this particular pandemic is the latest, but it's not the last. If you study this chart closely, you'll see that pandemics initially were coming every few hundred years, and then you would see one every 100 years. Then there was one every 50 years. In the last 20 years, there have been 5 pandemics. So in the marine timeline, a vessel on a 5-year dry docking cycle should expect to deal with a pandemic within that cycle, which is really hard to imagine when you consider the issues that we're all facing trying to deal with the current crisis. And like many of these threats, whether it be the environmental risk that we talked about earlier or the face of this pandemic threat, it's our responsibility as leaders in the industry to address the concerns about health and safety. And true to our strategy, we want to do that in a way that doesn't compromise the business. It doesn't compromise the economic goals of the company. And the challenges the industry is facing to create value. We want to balance both, and that's why we are excited to be talking about some new solutions today that we think will do that. We have been, as I said, in this space for a long time, really built around this initial lubricant technology, and we saw the opportunity to take our experience in both cleaners and lubricants and essentially create a platform. We had been hearing and seeing a lot of questions and challenges about how do they do this? How do they make the environment, whether it be the office environment or the vessel environment, safe? And so we feel like this is an opportunity for us to create some value. And it's not just a reaction to the current times. We believe this is going to be a significant and important platform for us in years to come. And a lot of it is based on this same thing that we have been doing with customers for many years, which is helping deal with the confusion, helping deal with the uncertainty around how do I keep my business running, address this risk, but do it safely, do it efficiently. That is really the hallmark of our business, to provide these solutions that in this case address cleaning and disinfecting that do not compromise the other challenges that they're addressing, our clients are addressing. So for us and for this particular platform, first and foremost, sustainability is critical for us. The ingredients we use, the certifications they have, but also how the applications are delivered. Can they be delivered without PPE, without mixing, in a way that's non-toxic? But again, they have to be high performing. Just like our lubricant technology, The industry will not accept a technology that solves one problem but creates a whole host of additional problems. So they need to perform well, and they need to be versatile. Just like a lubricant dropping into a stern tube without changing systems, it needs to be easy to operate, easy to use, easy to deliver. And so what we have done in this case is pull together a complete set of solutions that do all of these things. So people need to be able to come to a partner and remove the noise, remove the options that are not safe, that are not effective. And so we've done that across a range of technologies, cleaners, disinfectants, even creating overall protocols that make it simple to address the challenges. And beyond that, especially in this industry, a lot of times it's one thing to have a product, but it's even more important to have a holistic solution that could include service. It could also include communication. In many cases, our customers are dealing with a need to not only solve the problem, but help the stakeholders understand what they're doing. Just talking, Ginger talking about some of the financial stakeholders, but there are many stakeholders that need to understand what have you done to make the environment safer. And so that's part of what we do, is try to help communicate, whether that be PR or signage. But today, the thing that I really want to talk the most about is this 90-day continuous disinfectant coating. Among all the things that we're doing right now, I feel like, and we feel like, that it has particular relevance to the marine industry, an environment where people are often in close quarters. It could be a traditional shipping vessel, but especially the cruise industry as well, where you have not the same kind of opportunity to keep an environment safe, and it can be very costly to do so with traditional solutions. So I will take a second just to introduce this technology. I know we don't have a ton of time, but I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, and I would look forward to the opportunity to talk more about it down the road. But what's significant about it is it really is a simple solution to deliver, and then it continues to protect for 90 days at a minimum across a whole host of surfaces. The technology is particularly unique. There are a number of antimicrobial coatings that are out there and have been out there. We feel like this is the first ever technology that provides that durable protection, but also includes viruses and has the data to support the durability. Obviously, the durability is critically important on a wide range of surfaces, and this technology is the first to have evidence of effectiveness on viruses, including the virus that causes the COVID-19 disease. And repeating a little bit what I said earlier, obviously the continuous coverage is very important, but for us, it's also important to be able to deliver this in a way that's safe. It's non-toxic, it's odorless, it does not contain VOCs, it can be delivered very efficiently. Our crews can get in and out of an environment, and within 10 minutes or so, the environment is ready to re-enter. And so that is very important in an operation that has to be running 24/7 in some cases. The other thing that's significant is it will not wear off even under repeated cleaning. So in a lot of cases, our customers desire to have this protection, but they have a standard cleaning crew, some sort of janitorial service or crew that is providing regular maintenance. That regular maintenance, that regular cleaning protocol is not going to affect the durability of this technology. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the comprehensiveness, the ability to use our technical expertise in biotechnology to support our customers, to help verify that the coating has been put on in the proper thickness, that it's doing what it's supposed to do, and helping our clients communicate the work they've done to provide an environment that thinks about either the customers or the employees' wellness and safety. We have a significant amount of research behind this on 2 generations of this technology. The initial technology that has a long track record has a lot of data in hospitals, in transit authorities, in a variety of applications that show durability. And what's important is the evolution of the technology has improved the binder so that it is not only more durable, but now the effectiveness against the coronavirus is now evident. So if you look at this chart, the chart on the right that talks about the coronavirus 229E, in a lot of cases, that is the first step in understanding the effectiveness on this novel coronavirus. But what you'll see is that on the surface, once it's been applied, that within 2 hours, it has a 99.99% kill, and within 10 minutes, it's over 90%. And then what happens is you have a technology that's continuing to provide protection over the next 90 days. And there is a number of research studies, again, to support this, including research behind the coronavirus itself. And I think what is really important to understand when you think about a technology that can deliver essentially an always-on protection is it does two very significant things for the vessel owner operator. The first is it can dramatically change what the practices around daily disinfecting could look like. So in many cases, our customers are doing nightly disinfecting, daily disinfecting, which provides a point-in-time solution, but then as soon as contaminants enter the environment, there is no solution until the next daily disinfecting. Our view is some of that disinfecting is going to continue to happen with this technology, but the amount needed to maintain a healthy environment is dramatically different. The second thing is the overall bioburden, that the amount of biofilm that accumulates on surfaces is dramatically reduced. And this is what most of the studies that have been conducted are designed to do, is to look at the accumulation of the bioburden and the level of reduction that takes place with this type of coating. So imagine in an environment like a cruise ship, if you're able to reduce surface contaminants by more than 75%, and the potential for infections and cross-contamination significantly, what that does for a vessel owner operator, a cruise ship, could be really significant in terms of risk reduction, regardless of the savings on the daily disinfectant side. And we feel like whether it is at the home office, the retail store, or the vessel itself, that having a clean and an environment that is designed around mitigating this particular risk and more that will come in the future is a competitive advantage. Employees, customers, passengers are going to want to understand what has been done to address this. It reduces the risk of exposure. It creates some satisfaction that the leadership, the company, the business is doing what they can to mitigate the risk. And we feel like in a lot of situations, it will lower operating costs and minimize business disruption. So with that, I'll just pause and see what questions there might be. Again, excited to be talking about something very different in this market. We have spent many years in presentations like this talking about biodegradable stern tube oil, and it's fun for me to be talking about a technology that we feel like is really in a significant need. There's nothing about this crisis that is fun, but solving problems and helping create solutions is something that creates energy for us. And hopefully this has been interesting. Thank you.
Yes, it was, Mike. Thank you very much for your presentation. We have one question from Ginger Agarte. Are there any materials that your disinfectant cannot adhere to? Are there any byproducts?
Yeah, so there are none that it won't adhere to. I think what you'll find is that there are certain surfaces that might be more subject to abrasion. Abrasion is the thing that would provide, that tends to be what wears the surface off. And most of the testing that has been done is on the high traffic area. So a doorknob, something that's going to see the most abrasion is where they base the 90 on. There are some surfaces that we actually would recommend don't get coated. A glass, for example, it could create potentially a slight bit of a fog, depending on what type of, if it's a window that people are just looking out of, versus if it's a door, we would recommend treating it. It does not. It has an impact that's negative on copper and brass, But unless you're in an art museum, most likely the brass is already coated, so it would work fine on that. The other issue is on a hard floor. What could potentially happen is if you have a buffer, that will remove the coating. So what we would recommend is a 90-day treatment, and you tie a floor buffing to the coating. But on a carpet, it will be highly durable.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions from myself as well. I would like to ask you, would this 90-day surface treatment eliminate the need for other disinfection?
Yeah, so we think it will significantly reduce the need. A lot of it depends on the environment that you're operating in. We actually have some customers that want to provide additional disinfecting as a way in high traffic areas, as a way to show the maximum protection to and stakeholders, customers, passengers, that type of thing. But to a large extent, we think that will be reduced dramatically. And in some areas, it won't be necessary at all. If there is an exposure or some sort of large event where there's a significant amount of pathogens introduced in the system, say somebody was sick or got sick in an area, then we might suggest disinfecting that space, but the need is dramatically reduced.
Okay. And how have the claims against coronaviruses for this extended surface treatment been verified?
Yeah, so there's been some research conducted out of the University of Arizona by one of the leading antimicrobial scientists, Dr. Gerba. And so there's some independent studies that have been done specifically testing the durability and the effectiveness on the coronavirus itself. And then there's some other tests in, say, hospitals and transit authorities that look at the durability of the overall system. So the primary answer to your question is the antimicrobial specialist, Dr. Gerba, and his independent research.
Okay. And I have one last question. How is the 90-day surface treatment different from the others on offer in the market?
Well, I mentioned one of them earlier, and that is the durability and kind of related to that, the effectiveness on the coronavirus. We're not aware, or coronaviruses in general, and specifically the SARS-CoV-2 virus. We're not aware of others that have research to support that. And the second thing that kind of supports that particular differentiation is the US EPA is putting this technology through its emergency Section 18 waiver process. So what we would do with an account in the US is work directly with the US EPA to gain a approval, a waiver specifically for that customer. And when the EPA does that, that means they haven't identified any other technologies that exist today that address the problem. So that's another sign that this technology is unique.
Great. And we have one last message from Ginger. She says, thank you, great presentation and news that scientifically tested solutions can safely allow us to return to operation.
That I appreciate that comment, Ginger. I think for us, the basis of science and research is really significant for us. I talked about our lubricant business, and being able to provide data in a stern tube or a thruster is critically important, and the same is true in this area. We're fortunate to have several PhDs on our team with antimicrobial and coating experience. So we really look forward to having a dialogue with customers in applications to even learn more, because this is a new world we're entering. So thank you for the comment about the science basis of these things.
And thank you for this amazing presentation, Mike.
All right. Thanks again for having me.
Yes, of course. So if anybody has some questions to Mike, you can post it in our public section, or you can contact Mike directly. Now I would like to welcome on stage our last speaker for today. This will be Scott Bergeron. He is Director of Business Development and Strategy at Oldendorf, and he will be speaking on the topic, Understanding GHG Reduction and Carbon Intensity Indicators. Scott, could you please activate your microphone and your camera? Yes, we can hear you, but cannot see you at this moment. Yes, so Scott, we can see you.
Okay.
And we can
Good.
hear you. So
You can
the
hear
floor
me.
is yours.
Very good. Good. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share our point of view. So I'm talking a little bit more in the detail about the greenhouse gas and carbon intensity ratios that are floating around in the industry right now. But first, a small introduction about Oldendorf. For any of those who aren't familiar with Oldendorf Carriers, we're a dry ship operator and owner. We, on any given day, we operate about 700 ships. We have a deadweight capacity of about 60 million tons, carrying 320 million tons per year, 14,000 port calls, ton charter and cargo fixtures, about 8,000 per year. So what I'm speaking about today comes from the perspective of a pure dry bulk operator, much of which also applies to the other sectors, but again, our experience with dry bulk. I don't think we need to spend much time on this slide. Most of the audience is probably familiar with the objectives set by the IMO 2030, 2050. Just to comment that most of what's being talked about today is carbon intensity. However, by 2050, all greenhouse gases are expected to be reduced by 50%. Again, another slide. I think we've borrowed this from DNV, but it shows the pathways, and that business as usual is not going to achieve the desired result, and that action has to be taken by the industry and ship owners in particular. Generally speaking, aside from or excluding alternative fuels, there's two ways to improve or reduce the GHG emissions. One is to reduce the activity level. However, as ship owners and maritime industry generally, we're unable to do that. We can't control those factors that affect global trade. However, what we can do is focus on improving efficiency. This is what I'm calling the alphabet soup of the GHG emission reductions. The audience will start to be familiar with some of these letters and try to understand what they all mean. What's interesting about this is, aside from ESI, which is Environmental Ship Index, all of these indicators are focusing on carbon intensity. ESI is the first one, which I'll talk a little bit more about in detail, that takes into other emissions. The first one is a design indicator. When looking at this formula that's come out of the IMO, you might get a bit dizzy. But to simplify it, basically, EEDI is a design index. It's something that's put together by the ship designer in the shipyard. And it's essentially CO2 emissions divided by transport work. Again, it's a design indicator. It's static. It's how the vessel is built and designed. And it gives an indication. One of the things that I think the industry hasn't gotten much credit from by the environmentalists is the work that's been put into the EEDI. It has progressive phases. It started before we were actually measuring emissions. And it is making some improvements that we're already seeing today. The progressive phases continue to apply, and the next phase 3 comes into effect in 2025, just 5 years from now. So ships still built in 2025 will have to meet more aggressive standards than ships built today. The rest of the elements that can be controlled by ship owners to some extent are operational indicators. These indicators are based on the actual operation of the vessel compared to the design of the ship. There are two main concepts right now that are driven by regulation. One comes from the IMO in their data collection system. And from that data that's required to be reported as of last year comes the average efficiency ratio, AER, which was mentioned earlier today by Ginger. The EU also has a regulation known as MRV, and they enable a calculation of the Energy Efficiency Operational Index, or EEOI. However, the EU regulation only applies to vessels and voyages coming to or from the EU, so it's not giving a true global outlook. The main difference between these two is the denominator of the ratio, where the IMO system uses the vessel's full deadweight as the denominator in the ratio. The EU does a somewhat better job trying to capture utilization and uses the actual weight of the cargo transported. The problem with the EU system in reporting the actual weight of cargo transported is it can be somewhat commercially sensitive, and that has gotten some pushback from the industry. Here is a bit of a cheat sheet. My presentation is available to the audience, and it's not intended to understand or get into all these formulas, but it's a clean cheat sheet, as I say, to help remind everyone what some of these indicators are and what they mean. And what I suggest is focusing in this area that just gives you a brief description of what each formula means, because all these little alphabet soup floating around, it's easy to forget which one is which and how they differ. But just to repeat what I've said, the first one, which is EEOI, uses actual transport work. The basis is how much cargo is actually cargo, as opposed to AER, which is the IMO one, which is basis on the vessel's deadweight. There are other ratios available, or they're being used. The next one down here is the individual ship performance indicator. And this is the amount of CO2 emitted by the ship using the distance traveled as the proxy for transport work. And finally, there's a energy efficiency per service hour, something that's being promoted by the United States at the IMO, and it's based on service hours in the denominator. So CO2 emissions based on service hours of the ship. Commercially speaking, there's a variety of incentives that are available to the industry. The first one is the Environmental Ship Index. This is an initiative of the IHPH's World Port Sustainability Program. And what it's attempting to do is incentivize ship owners to reduce their emissions in exchange for port cost reductions. Oldendorf is participating in this program. We're reporting to them every 6 months as required, and we're obtaining tens of thousands of dollars of port fee reductions around the world based on the participating ports. As I mentioned before, what's interesting about this system is that it looks at more than just carbon intensity. They're looking at the NOx, SOx, and it's continuing to evolve, and it's more holistic about the vessel emission program. The formula is a bit complex and more details necessary than time we have, but their website is quite helpful, explains this, and it lists all of the ships participating in the program. Below is a screenshot of some of our vessels that are in the program. And what to notice is that the higher the ESI score, the better performing the vessel is and the greater port discount you may receive. Ginger spoke about the Poseidon Principles. This is an initiative of the Global Maritime Forum. The financial institutions are starting to use this, and I can say that our lenders have started to request us to report our emission data, which has already been reported to the IMO. The key to understand about Poseidon principles is they're using AER, the annual efficiency ratio, one of the several ratios that I've mentioned before. I thought it would be useful for the audience to start to understand how these ratios are presented and what some actual numbers look at. So with our fleet, I've pulled a few ships of different sizes, and just again to try to demonstrate how the different ratios that are being discussed look and how they compare based on different size vessels. First one, the EEDI, we talked about. This is the design index, and you can see a smaller handy-sized ship has an EEDI of about 4.7 compared to a Newcastle Max, one of the larger Cape-size ships, with a 2.23. That's grams of CO2 emitted per ton mile. When we compare this with the AER, again, this is the IMO's formula used by Poseidon Principles. You can see how these numbers compare. In some cases, they're better. In some cases, they're worse than the EEDI. Poseidon Principles has developed a scale to bring the AER down towards the 2030 and the 2040 goals. So each year, Poseidon Principles require lower and lower numbers. And these are the 2019 numbers, how they compare to the column of AER. The next column is the 2050 IMO target. So you're starting to see in the media, certain companies are indicating that they've achieved so much percentage or they're so many years ahead of the IMO goals. And in this case, with these vessels, you can see that the small handy-sized ship has achieved 66.8% of the 2050 objective, whereas a Newcastle Max has only achieved 15.4%. I mentioned the EEOI. Again, this is based on the EU's formula, and this is using the actual cargo carried over a period of a year, and you see how these numbers compare. The Environmental Ship Index is the incentive by the ports that I mentioned, and the ISPI is a program being supported by the EU as well, the Individual Ship Performance Indicator, and this is how the ratio for those look. Here's a bit of a kaleidoscope, if you will, of part of our fleet. I thought it would be interesting to share, just to see how ships of similar categories or similar sizes compare. The top section is some of our Panamax ships. You'll notice that they're varying deadweight, which is one of the criteria, but they're all in the same IMO size category. So this means they're judged the same despite the somewhat significant differences in deadweight. And what you can see here, the Panamax B, as I call it, our worst performing vessel from an EEDI standpoint, is actually middle of the pack for the other ratios. Similarly, Panamax F, which is our best EEDI of this group of vessels, is one of the worst in terms of the individual ship performance indicator. So you can see that none of these formulas are actually perfect or consistent. And one of the issues that has to be addressed is how vessels are grouped and compared with their peers. Now, we have a fleet of Newcastle Max ships that all have approximately the same deadweight. But what you'll be able to see is they vary based on the trade of how much emissions, which is a result of how much fuel they burn, and how far they sail. There's a little bit more consistency here because of the same denominator of the deadweight. And what you can see with Newcastle Max D, they're pretty consistently performing against the AER, EEOI, and ISPI. whereas the worst performing EEDI, again, is middle of the pack. But one of the middle of the pack EEDI vessels, Newcastle Max G, actually is the worst performer with regard to all the other ratios. So I thought this would be interesting for the audience to see. Now that we have this data, it's the first year that's been available because it's been required to be reported to the IMO. And I think the industry is just now starting to understand how these different formula come together and how they might be used in the future, both commercially and also to achieve some of the emission reduction intentions. So to conclude this, I say that the GHG measurement and ratios, they're here to stay. None of these ratios are perfect. Some miss the details that may result in unintended behavior. For example, there's no segregation of ships with cargo gear versus just open hatch vessels. And this is particular significance in the dry bulk trades, but also certain container ships that have cargo gear that may not be used, but will affect the fuel consumption. So often we see geared ships going to developing countries, and could an unintended behavior be that ship owners avoid trade with those countries because it's going to ruin or increase their emission record? So it's just a question I put out there. We're only starting to see these calculation results because the regulations to report them have just come upon us in 2019. So we're starting to see the actual data feed into the ratios that have been somewhat theoretical up until this point. I think we can expect, and we're already seeing, that the ratios will be politicized, especially by the environmental activists that are keeping us on our toes. We can expect they will continue to move the goal line and try to drive continued improvement, even beyond the regulations that are being discussed today. The ratios, as usual, will be gamed. We're already starting to see some companies report interesting adaptations with new ratios or new definitions. In my view, ultimately, ship owners, as always, will comply with the regulations, but the issue of carbon emissions and reducing greenhouse gases is not simply a ship owner problem. We need the entire industry to rally, but we also need the entire logistics and supply chain to rally. Long-term solutions are going to require collaboration, and it's going to require funding. There's different talks and studies about how many billions of dollars the shipping industry needs to bring to the table to solve these issues. And this is more than just what ship owners can afford. The cargo interests and ultimately the consumers are all going to have to pay for these improvements that our society has agreed it needs. So that's my conclusion. I appreciate everybody's attention today, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Scott, for your amazing presentation. I'll just check if we have some questions. As of this point, I don't see any questions, but if you have some questions to Scott or Oldendorf in general, make sure to contact him via email, as we will send contact details of the viewers and presenters after this event. So thank you very much, Scott, for sharing your insights.
Absolutely.
Goodbye. As all good things eventually come to an end, so does our US Greentech in Shipping online forum. Many of you spent recent time overcoming new challenges in order to keep your organizations operational. In such a challenging environment, it became very easy to lose track of the big picture, making shipping a more sustainable business. That is why ALJ Group would like to thank all of you who chose to attend the US Greentech in Shipping online forum, and a special thank you for the speakers that prepared amazing presentations for us all. Nevertheless, the world is slowly coming back to normal, and we at ALJ Group are ready to get back out there and provide you with the best content and networking opportunities. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter to get news on physical events for 2021. Once again, thank you for all the viewers, speakers, and sponsors for making this possible. We hope to meet you again soon. Have a good one.